Good morning. Would members of the Planning and Housing Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Good morning. Would members of the Planning and Housing Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum?
Okay, good morning, everybody. If I could ask members of the committee to take their seats. We now have quorum. Would like to start the meeting. And thank you. Thanks, everybody, to making it to the meeting 12 of the Planning and Housing Committee. I want to welcome the members of the committee and members of the public here with us today. And for those in the room with us, the screen at the back provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the December 10th, 2019 meeting? Councillor Bradford, all those in favor? That carries. Okay, let's run through the agenda. Provincial item 12.1, Provincial Consultation on Ontario's Building Code Service Delivery. I do have a couple of questions on this one. 12.2, 2019, Toronto Employment Survey. We have a presentation. City Planning Division Study Work Plan 12.3, we have speakers, and 12.4, Christie's Planning Study Status Update, and 2150 and 2194 Lakeshore Boulevard West, and 23 Park Lawn Road Official Plan Amendment Application Preliminary Report. Are there any questions on this item? No? Okay, so I guess we can move the report. I just want to thank staff. This is great planning work in here. I know they've been working hard with different departments and the local community and the local councillor, and we're starting to see a real complete community coming with jobs, different types of housing, all with good transit access, and so exactly the kind of communities we want to make sure that it gets built and supported with the infrastructure that they will need. So thanks, staff, and let's continue to have these updates coming forward and see the great work that you're doing. And so I'll move that. All those in favor? And that carries. Okay, item 12.1, Provincial Consultation on Ontario's Building Code Service Delivery. Any speakers on this item? No. Questions of staff? Councillor Fletcher.
Yes. Can you just explain, it does seem to me that, from what I've read, that there's now a move to have builders inspect their own work on site. In certified in what way? It's kind of like the Boeing 737 MAX where they inspected their plane over and over again. So having third-party inspections seems to be very important. Are we seriously moving away from the professional inspections that will be done by a municipality?
Through the chair, I think the first thing that's important to recognize is that at this point in time, the province has put out a consultation paper where they're consulting with municipalities across the province on some ideas as to how they can improve the way building code services are delivered across the province. One of those ideas right now is building on a model that's takes place in the province of BC, where architects and engineers are certified on the building code, and they have the ability to be hired directly by property owners, builders, or developers to provide those building code services for their projects.
What does that mean for inspections?
So through the chair, the comments that we've provided back to the province are primarily around the aspect of the independent oversight. So right now, under the current model that we have, is the city provides those inspections. Our builders, developers, or property owners apply for a permit, we issue the permit, and then we carry out the inspections to confirm that the construction is in compliance with the requirements of the building code. Under this model, Keep in mind, we don't have a lot of details around it would look like, but if it was similar to what happens in the province of BC, what it would be is architects and engineers would be hired directly by the developer to certify that the plans meet the requirements of the building code, and then they would conduct the inspections in lieu of the city to certify that the construction meets the requirements of the code.
And so there would be no repository on trends or different things that we might find if there's no third party or no city inspection, or corners could be cut. There's no recourse, really. Would there be recourse at that point? If there's things done wrong?
So through the chair, we don't know what the details are right now. What it would just do is allow those independent architects and engineers to provide those services in lieu of the city. So the city would be out of that process. But to what degree, we don't know right now because the province hasn't put forward the details of what that would look like.
And can I just ask if in BC, are these people professionally certified? They're not only working in that capacity, they're not working for the developer or the business and then certifying the work. Are they just specifically doing that building job, or do they cross the line back and forth to developing plans and drawing things?
Through the chair, I can't speak to what the model looks like in the province of BC. In the province of BC, that it's an optional permit and inspection process that's available to property owners, developers, builders, and in that model, architects and engineers are trained, have to go through a process where they're certified on the building code, and they deliver that service, and they're hired directly by the developer or builder to provide that service. And they provide that sign-off to the city.
And is there some way the city can ensure that that's correct?
The city only does, in the city of Vancouver, I can speak for theirs, the city carries out a cursory review. They don't do a detailed review of those plans, and they don't provide the inspection services. The certified professional does that on behalf of the property owner.
Any idea how many building permits are open at the moment for construction in the city of Toronto?
In the city of Toronto, we issue 50. So last year we issued over 50,000 building permits.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you. With respect to the timeline that the province has stipulated, they released this particular proposal. I understand that there was not a lot of details attached to it. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct.
And so what is the timeline that they anticipate that municipalities would respond to and stakeholders?
Through the chair, the consultation paper went out in late September and was for approximately 60 days, so it closed at the end of November. So so they provided about 60 days for municipalities to respond to the consultation paper. As far as implementation, we don't have any details on that at this point.
And today, building inspectors are not just expected to know the technical applications of the building code under the Building Code Act, but they're also required to communicate around conflicts. They're expected to mediate. They're expected to draw out positive outcomes. And that's, I believe that's the way we would be hiring our inspectors, based on those series of skills. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct. One of the pieces of the consultation paper is looking at the process that building officials and practitioners are qualified under the provincial system. And one of our comments on that is that we are supportive of that, but what we also need is to ensure that building officials receive training also on those softer skills, so they understand what the requirements are, and they can, so they understand the requirements and they have the skills that are needed around conflict resolution, that type of thing. So there are proposals in this consultation paper that speak to that.
Can you explain to us what is a prime consultant?
Through the chair, this is one of the areas in the consultation paper that the Toronto building does support. And so what this is it's requiring that on complex projects, typically on a complex project, you have a multitude of engineers and design professionals, including an architect, that's responsible for that design. What the province is proposing is that there is one of those those consultants is identified as the prime consultant, and their role would be to coordinate the work of all the registered professionals in ensuring that all of the requirements of the code are being implemented in that design. So that is something that we do support.
And then the pieces that you do not support, can you explain what that would be?
The piece that, there's only one piece that we have expressed that we didn't support, and it relates to the certified professionals. And our concern there is more about the independent oversight. And so our concern is that if the province is to move forward with a certified professional, what we would like to see is that it needs to have independent oversight. So right now, under the model that we believe that they're consulting on, it allows certified professionals to carry out that work on behalf and be employed by, the relationship is between the certified professional and the developer or property owner.
Is the suggestion today that a developer or a property owner would be able to either ask for the building permit and have the inspection done by a city official, or to create an option to have that done by a certified professional retained by the developer? Is that what's before us now? Is that what the province is proposing? Or is it to eliminate all the city building officials so that the private developer only goes to private individuals that are certified architects and designers as they deem fit, but retained by the developer? Like, is it options, or is it abolishing one system to replace it with another?
So once again, through the chair, the ideas right now, it's just an idea that the province is consulting on. We don't have a lot of the details. What we believe that they may be thinking is more it's an optional program that would be available to the development industry. And so we don't know what the impact would be for the municipalities at this point.
But it would be important for us to understand what that impact would be.
That's correct. One of the pieces, through the chair, one of the pieces, or one of the recommendations in front of you is that the city continue to have a dialogue with the province as they're developing this to ensure that the concerns that we've identified are addressed.
And then maybe my final question is, what would be the motivation for this change from the province? Like, is there something that we're doing that's insufficient to meet the needs in the community or the demand in the sector? Are city building officials not doing a good job of keeping the public safe from faulty and deficient buildings? Like, why the need for this change?
Through the chair, it's not my view that the city inspectors are not doing a good job. I would say, I can say that when we're responding to building permit applications, over 90% of those building permit applications are responded to within 10 to 30 days, depending on the complexity of the application. And so we respond to those in that time frame. When we receive a request for an inspection, over 90% of the time we respond to that request for an inspection within 48 hours.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, do we know yet if the certified professionals model will be something that municipalities are required to implement, or is it something that we would be opting into?
Through the chair, at this point, we don't know the details of the program. What I can tell you is that the program in the province of BC is an optional program.
Okay, so in BC, they're opting in.
It's optional, so a developer could go hire a certified professional to provide those services,
Okay.
Or alternatively, they can seek the permissions and have city inspectors carry out those inspections.
Okay, so it's sort of, in the report, it's sort of signaling that we could potentially see some new powers on the enforcement side. Certainly, we would like to see that. How likely do you think it is that we'll have new administrative penalties on the enforcement side, and what might that look like?
Through the chair, this is one of the areas that we do support. As far as how likely we are to see that implemented, I can't speak to that at this point, but what I can say is the province has heard the concerns of local governments across the province, knowing that we do need stronger tools to help with enforcement. Having this in place would help with that.
What, at this point, is the conversation or the dialogue like between Toronto Buildings and the province, and how can we continue to provide that feedback?
Toronto Building does consult with the province, with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing on the way building code services are delivered. This is something we have asked the province for assistance with, looking for stronger tools that can help us with enforcement. What's evident from the consultation paper is the province has heard that request and has responded to it.
Okay. Through our subcommittee on the protection of affordable rental housing, a lot of the issues on the enforcement side, building code related issues, could potentially be addressed through some of these changes. Do you know if the province is considering alignment between the building code and other legislation such as the Residential Tenancies Act?
Through the chair, the consultation paper that's out right now that municipalities across the province have responded to does not speak to that. However, Toronto Building is participating on an interdivisional group team that's actually looking at those exact issues. Through that, we're hopeful that we can identify some opportunities that could assist with that.
So there is lots of opportunity for alignment, and these issues do cross over the different pieces of legislation.
Through the chair, there is that opportunity. However, the consultation paper that we consulted on does not address that specifically.
Okay, thanks very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. I have a question, a couple different questions. My first is to someone from the City Solicitor's Office. So, years ago, the City of Toronto looked at the issue of pesticides and decided that we needed tougher regulations in the City of Toronto than existed province-wide, and we wound up relying on a Supreme Court decision that said that municipalities can go further than federal and provincial governments if they could demonstrate a general welfare reason for doing it. Hudson v. Spraytech. I'm wondering if, should the province proceed here, and we have legitimate concerns that the system they bring in wouldn't adequately protect Torontonians in terms of building code investigations and reviews, has the city solicitor turned their mind, or whether there would be any legal opportunity for the city to go further than whatever the province does?
Certainly, we haven't specifically looked at that point, Councillor. However, and perhaps the chief building official can expand on this, but my understanding is that certainly in terms of the building code, it is a provincial-wide piece of legislation, and the province is, I think it's Section 35, does not provide a lot of latitude in terms of municipalities being outside of the code requirements. I would say, however, that needless to say, the public interest should be paramount in all of these matters. I also certainly share the concern of the chief building official, and he does note, potential conflict of interest in situations that may arise when you have outside consultants inspecting and certifying code compliance. And I would once again just reiterate that perhaps that might not in all cases be in the public interest, and that's something we have to be very concerned about. I'm also concerned about anything that would reduce the number of inspections that occur at building sites. I think the more often the inspector attends the site, the better in the public interest. As you know, applications can be extremely complex in terms of the type of developments we have in the city, and I think that inspectors on the site provide a very valuable source of information in terms of ensuring that there is compliance, not just with respect to code, but obviously with respect to the issued building permits, compliance with the plans, whether it's a high-rise building or simply an infill house. As you know, Committee of Adjustment often imposes very specific conditions on plans for houses that have been put there because neighbors are specifically concerned about privacy, overlook. Those are absolutely crucial to public interest. So once again, I think this is a very touchy issue, and that, yes, it's probably incumbent upon the municipality to take a very close look at this to ensure that the public interest is not being diminished.
Would it be possible, in time for this to get to council, to have a further look about whether a general welfare or City of Toronto Act provision might give us some of the same tools. I mean, you know, I understand the Building Code Act is provincial, but similarly, the regulations that permitted pesticide use were federal and provincial, and nevertheless, the City of Toronto imposed additional limits. So is that something you...
Certainly, we can look at that if directed by committee to do so prior to council.
Thank you.
It's relatively tight, but I'm assuming you want it for the 29th?
Yes, please. For the chief building official, this administrative authority, I could not for the life of me figure out what it was supposed to do.
Through the chair, an administrative, what the province is proposing in this regard is setting up an administrative authority outside of government. And what that administrative authority would do is be responsible for providing excuse me, support to local government with respect to interpretations to the building code, hearing disputes related to interpretations of the building code, manage the building code qualification process, those types of administrative pieces. In the report, what we have said is that we have some concerns around that, and our concerns around that are that if an administrative authority is set up, how does policy inform the administration? Because often what's happening on the administrative side does have effects on the code development and policy side. So what we've raised as to the province is that if they are going to move forward with an administrative authority, making sure that that system is set up so that one is informing the other. The other piece is making it clear as to where local government's voice would be. Would it be through this administrative authority or through the province?
Now, I don't fully understand what you mean when you say services to municipalities.
So through the chair, what I'm referring to is that the ministry right now provides support to municipalities around interpretations to the building code. The ministry hears disputes related between building officials and the development industry related to those, or disputes around the code, and they provide that support. If an administrative authority was set up, it would actually provide that in lieu of the government doing it directly.
So would this be something like what Tarion does?
Similar, or TSSA.
Boy, there's an alarm bell. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So with this certification, so we don't have that in the province of Ontario right now.
Through the chair, right now, under the legislation, there is not an ability for developers to, or for architects or engineers.
Certification, so our building inspectors, do they need to be certified by anybody?
Through yourself. Right now, building officials need to have provincial qualifications to demonstrate or knowledge and competency around the building code.
So this new certification, is it new or does it already exist?
So it's new from the perspective is that it would allow architects and engineers to become certified in order to provide those services in lieu of the city. However, the city, under the legislation right now, the city directly has the ability to hire consultants to help them with areas we may want help with.
Okay, so for example, we have third-party reviews on lots of stuff that we do, right? Sometimes we need a third-party review on an engineer thing, and we say to the developer, okay, you're going to have to pay for that, and we go and we hire a third party to have third-party review. Are we currently allowed, let's say we needed something, there's a spike, there's something that we needed some services, are we allowed to do that right now?
That is correct. We are allowed to do that under the legislation.
So if there was anything, like say there was an influx of applications or something that we needed to very quickly for the next 6 months go out there and get some assistance, we could do that.
The legislation does allow the municipality to do that, but the relationship would be between with us as opposed to with the developer.
So that's what you're alerting the province is this relationship that there might arise some conflicts of interest, right? That
you are correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make clear. So, and the training, so this certification that exists, and the training is done already by the province, or do we do our own?
The training, right now, the training is delivered by the province. So they're responsible for certifying that building officials or building practitioners actually have competency on the code by getting their qualification through the ministry. So they provide that service right now.
That is already provided by them.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Speakers. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, I'd have a motion I would like to move here. So we can just get that on the screen. Basically, the wording is just stating that, you know, we know here that we have a problem with rent evictions, and we have a problem with very vague maintenance standards in the Residential Tenancies Act, but the building code, where we have the T to enforce it, is not necessarily aligned. So this is just another opportunity for us to make that connection for the province and ask that when they are considering any changes with the Ontario Building Code Act, that aligns with property maintenance standards requirements through the Residential Tenancies Act, and that either through legislation, regulation, or engagement with tenants and landlords, that those conversations and dialogue take place. I'd also like to just thank staff for their work on this. I know that a lot of the work program here at the city across a number of divisions is informed by changes that are taking place at the province and driving a lot of our work right now. So it's a lot of heavy lifting for everyone, and I do appreciate everyone's efforts on that. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, okay. Any other speakers? Yeah, that's fine. Councillor Parks, go right ahead.
First of all, I want to apologize to the members of the committee. Like so many Torontonians, I had to suffer through the fact that we don't invest in transit vehicles this morning. I'm going to be moving a motion which will request the city solicitor to do a review of any legal options available to us should these changes in building code service delivery proceed. I'm profoundly concerned here, and I want to thank the chief building official for bringing these concerns to our attention. I also note that there's going to be a further report coming as more information comes forward. And I would like a little bit more robust treatment about some of the risks associated with this new administrative authority. I share all of the concerns about about the potential conflicts of interest if private developers are able to retain their own investigators. Geez, I wish I could retain people to investigate whatever I felt like. But I also have a deep concern about these arm's length administrative authorities and how they function for anyone who has had constituents suffer through problems resulting from condo registration and Terrian not really providing good service to protect people who bought into a condo. You will know that there are real risks there as well. And here we'll be in the absolutely ludicrous circumstance, potentially, of you hire your own building inspector, and then neither the city nor the province directly gets to enforce whether or not the work was done properly by the guy you hired. I mean, the public interest just gets so far removed from the public that, you know, I can foresee real disasters happening as a result of this. And I think council needs to be not just a little bit concerned about this. I think we have to view this as one of the greatest risks that the province has imposed on Torontonians if this proceeds. Anyway, I'm real worried.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Wong-Tam.
We'll be supporting it. Just to lend my voice on this particular matter, I think that the issue around ensuring that the building code is strong enough and rigorous enough so that the policy framework can be tested on the ground with technical application and knowledge, so that there's actually knowledgeable people to be able to interpret a policy and to make sure that it actually is implemented properly, has always been the stress test of the particular code. We also recognize that the City of Toronto in some ways has led the way. There are times where I know where we've actually advanced conversations, especially in the area of falling glass. It was something that I had to deal with early on in my first term. Glass panels falling out of buildings, crashing onto cars, into the middle of roads, into the sidewalk, and sometimes harming people, and I'm just surprised that no one's been actually killed. But, you know, we gave responses to the city. We compelled the province to do emergency amendments, but that had everything to do with us responding as a municipality to things that were happening in the built form under the building code that wasn't captured at that time. So that's us sort of responding and needing to do a quick policy pivot so we can then now upgrade that particular code. If left to the sector alone, and I recognize that there were class action lawsuits, there was a lot of confusion in the sector, there was some finger pointing. Was it the glass manufacturer? Was it the source of the sands, is how this glass was being imported from abroad, how it was being implemented, how do you install that on the slab, and so forth and so forth and so forth. If we had left that conversation entirely in the hands of the development sector and the manufacturers, I'm really not sure if we would have got to a public response as quickly as we did at the City of Toronto to then just compel and change the code altogether. And if we set up a system, even as it's detailed right now, which is lacking of any real detail and substance, and we don't necessarily put up some rigorous testing, my fear is that what we were able to do to respond to an emerging building material crisis, and I would say it was a crisis, was we've got glass towers going up all over the city, and there was a lot of confusion in the sector. They needed the city to step in. They needed us to organize the sector, to ask the critical questions to get to the outcome. If we remove the role of government or weaken the role of government in protecting the public interest and the public safety, I fear what would have happened if these implementations being proposed by the province happened 10 years ago, because a lot of things have changed. So that's just one example that I can think of off the top of my head about how it came to be when the city did step in, municipalities and governments stepped in to protect the public, as opposed to the sector perhaps stepping in with the fear and confusion and huge profit margins at stake, with reputations of developers at stake, and what might have happened if they decided to perhaps cover it up, or soften the response, or not come forward in a public way that would allow us to make the changes necessary. And if the proposal from the province goes ahead, uncontested, I know that we're going to contest it, but if they bulldoze ahead, literally, these changes, and we're not able to vigorously defend the public interest, I am fearful that what we've seen happen about 7 or 8 years ago, that is just the beginning of what could happen if we have an industry that decides to cover up. And that would be, it's a multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar industry across the nation, and we know that lots of money is at stake. And sometimes it's easy to do things, it's sometimes very easy to see corruption take place. We don't have to go very far to see when we've had buildings in Canada. I think of the buildings in Vancouver when the materials were waterlogged and the condominiums that they were building were then set off with multi-million-dollar lawsuits where things didn't go well. What happens if the building inspectors were perhaps compromised, if they weren't able to protect the actual members of the public or the buyers of those units or the investors? And we've seen other places around the world where building inspections are done in a haphazard way, and any shifts on the ground and the entire building collapse like tofu. Like, this is not necessarily a conversation that we should walk into without elbows up and fists in the air and say, we'll do everything we can to protect the public interest, because public safety is paramount. So even though they're coming into this conversation quietly without very many details, we should make this a big, big, loud issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, I was just going to really support the motion from Councillor Perks, and when I asked that question earlier, I think we've all been reading about the Boeing 737 MAX and how it got to that particular place where it was crashing. It was all studied, self-certified. The FDA gave Boeing the right to sign off on everything that they did with no training. And that is a really cautionary tale for everything that we do. Our third-party certification is so important. And I do think that if it's like TSSA or these other institutions, well, we know about the big, what was that, the propane fire. The TSSA wasn't responsible for it, but they played a role in their lack of oversight of that large propane yard. So this is really going in a direction that is not compatible with our city and our desire to have maximum safety all around, whether it's on the streets, whether it's Vision Zero, whether it's in our buildings, making sure things are secure and going to last into not just this century, but the next century. So I really hope that we can make a difference here. And I know that this is really being pushed by the industry because they would like to have more of a green light. So we should really be looking at any conditions that we might be able to put on any approvals as to how things would be inspected, period. And I'd like to follow that up a bit more with General Counsel if that's something that we can think about. We might have the legal right or ability to do in order to emphasize our point.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I just want to say a few words, and I think that everybody really wants to make sure that the integrity of the process and the protection of the public interest is key and paramount. So I think that everybody shares the concern of the possible or even perceived conflict of interest in this situation. However, I'm happy to see in the report that there's also good things moving forward, and actually Councillor Bradford's motion as well, making sure that there's actually positive things that we can push for as we're having this conversation. So thanks to staff for bringing the report to us, and I really encourage you to bring your experience, your concerns to the table, and we're fortunate to have our Chief Building Officer that actually has a lot of experience in BC that seems to have quite a number of this scenario. So I think that having some of this knowledge at the table, I hope that that is taken in consideration. But let's also look for things that can help us in improve our processes as well. I think there's always space for us to respond better to things, so respond better to the circumstances that are facing us as well, from rent evictions to the pressure that we're having with so much development in our city. So if there's a way that we can actually present solutions that will be important and assist us as a city, I think I encourage you to do so. So participate at the table with your concerns and your suggestions, and always keeping in mind the integrity of the process, and that at the end of the day that we want to ensure that the public interest is defended while making sure that that we do our job and we build a great city. So thanks for the report, and I think I can move this as a package. Is that okay with the councillors? Yeah? Okay. So move it as a package. All those in favor? And that carries. Great. Item 2.2, Toronto Employment Survey. So we have a presentation from staff.
Chair, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Michael Wright, the Manager of Research and Information in the City Planning Division. My colleague, Karen Eklicki, and I are going to briefly review the results of the 2019 Toronto Employment Survey. Next, the City Planning Division collects current, accurate, and comprehensive data on employment through a field survey of all business locations that we can identify. We conduct face-to-face interviews at over 76,560 business establishments across the City of Toronto. We also follow up with emails and telephone calls, and we have a secure website for those who prefer to respond online. We also reach out to major employers in the city that have multiple business locations to ensure that we get as complete coverage as we can. We contact over 99% of the business locations outside the home, and in 2019 our response rate was 89.3%, over an increase of 3.3% over the previous year. This in part is due to the goodwill that we've built up with the business community through the annual survey program, as well as our commitment to maintain the confidentiality of the individual survey responses. We collect the number of full and part-time jobs at each location. Unique to the survey, though, is we also identified the predominant land use at which those jobs occur, so we can relate the employment activity to the use of the land that it occupies. This is useful in reviewing development applications, in monitoring the policies of the official plan, in building long-range employment projections, and in planning for major infrastructure such as transit, sewer, and water. In 2011, we also undertook to start classifying employment by a detailed national standard that helps us to break down the economy in great detail. That provides us a rich data set for time series analysis. Next. In 2019, employment within the city rose to a total of 1,569,800 jobs. It's an increase of almost 47,000 jobs in a single year, or a growth of 3.1% over 2018. This outperformed the national economy, which grew by about 1.9% in terms of employment over the July to July 2019 period. Full-time employment on a net basis increased by about 32,000 jobs, part-time employment by about 15,000 jobs, so roughly a 2-to-1 ratio. However, because part-time employment is a smaller proportion of the total job market, then the growth in part-time employment was actually faster than full-time employment over the past year. This chart shows the employment survey results since its inception in 1983, showing a remarkable history of booms, busts, and recoveries. Since the 2008-2009 global economic recession, the city's employment has grown by over 1/5. Most of that within the last 5 years, where we've added 185,000 jobs since 2014. Next. Those jobs are distributed all across the city. These circles on the map are proportionate to the number of jobs at each of those 76,000 business locations. They're concentrated within the downtown, in the centers, in the designated employment areas, as well as along the arterial roads. The challenge of this map is that the circles overlap. Next. So we decided to model the employment density by relating the jobs to non-overlapping polygons. These are little hexagons that are 15 hectares in size, so that you can see the density of jobs across the city. Not only are the jobs then concentrated within the downtown and the centers, but you can see significant density in all the employment areas across the city, in addition to the population-related employment elsewhere. In terms of land use, the chart on the left shows the predominant land use categories. Nearly half of all the jobs in the city are within the office land uses, as well as a significant representation in the other categories. The chart on the right shows the growth in employment on a net basis in each of those categories. Office added the most at over 23,000 jobs, excuse me, whereas the institutional sector grew most quickly at 6.6% of growth over 2018. The manufacturing sector lost 920 jobs over the past year. This includes readjustments in firms, as well as the closure of the Campbell Soup Factory. But over the last decade, manufacturing has added over 6,000 jobs within the city. Next. Over the longer term, the office category has added over 142,000 jobs. It's grown by almost a quarter. In proportionate terms, there's been significant growth within the institutional, service, and community and entertainment categories, which are of similar magnitude. Next. Using the North American Industrial Classification System, we're able to classify the city's employment into 20 major categories, as represented by the chart on the left. The top 5 categories represent more than half of all the jobs in the city, but you can also see the strong diversity of jobs across the city's economy. Over the last 5 years, 8 of these 20 sectors have grown faster than the citywide average of 3.1%, displaying that diversity, and the fastest growing sectors are indeed the 5 that are at the top. The chart on the right shows at a higher scale the overall composition of the city's employment. 3/4 of the city's jobs are within services activities, and the balance within government, institutional, and goods-producing activities in the economy. Next. The city is also a location for new business formation. In 2019, we identified 3,810 establishments that were either new to the city in terms of new business startups or that relocated from elsewhere. They're concentrated in the downtown, the centers, and the employment areas, and fully 1/4 of the new startups were in the designated employment areas, identifying their significance in terms of the strength of the employment areas to the city as a whole. Next. In 2019, we also undertook an analysis of the city's technology sector. We'd noticed the significant growth in the sector and its concentration, and we wanted to understand it a bit better. So first, we undertook to identify what we call tech firms as firms that use new technology by creating new platforms and use this to create new services which are innovative and potentially disruptive to other sectors, such as e-commerce. And through this, we identified over 1,700 tech sector firms representing over 60,400 jobs. The tech sector has almost doubled in size over the past 5 years, the largest subsector being computer systems design, which includes website design and development, information technology, IT consulting, and related activities. Now, the right-hand map shows the concentrations within the city. You'll notice the particular concentration within the financial district and downtown generally. The concentration to the left is Liberty Village. There are concentrations within each of the centers, but also within the designated employment areas that are predominantly office parks. Next.
A key reason for monitoring employment is to evaluate the success of official plan policies. The city has been successful at directing growth strategically according to our urban structure, as the majority of employment is within growth management areas, including downtown, the centers, and employment areas, which have 70% of all jobs in the city. These areas have added significant employment since 2014, growing by a combined 144,000 jobs. This represents 78% of Toronto's employment growth over the past 5 years. In 2019, downtown employment grew by 3.4%, adding over 19,000 jobs. And over the last 5 years, downtown has added over 100,000 jobs, growing at an average of 4.2% annually. Most jobs added downtown are office or institutional jobs. In the centers, employment grew faster this year than the past 5-year average. They contain over 82,000 jobs and added about 900 jobs in the past year. In 2019, 3 of the 4 centers grew, while Scarborough declined by around 1,100 jobs. These were mostly office jobs, some of which shifted downtown with firm relocations, and others that were downsized at different firms. Employment areas contain almost 424,000 jobs, which is about 3 of every 10 jobs in the city. They also contain almost 93% of all manufacturing employment. In order to monitor employment change within different geographies, we divided the city into 5 employment monitoring areas, or EMAs, shown on this map in blue. They are west, northwest, northeast, south, and east. EMAs enable us to portray the diverse employment characteristics of these different geographies. Of the EMAs, the east, northwest, and west have the largest number of jobs. They have large shares of employment in the manufacturing, transportation, and warehousing and construction sectors within their employment areas. In 2019, employment grew by a combined 1.6% in EMAs, adding about 6,500 jobs. Employment decreased in the Northeast EMA by 1.6%, which is the result of data improvements with large employers correcting their previous year's numbers, as well as some relocation or downsizing of staff at other firms.
These are the results of the 37th Annual Employment Survey, which is important for the various programs within the City Planning Division and used as information background to many exercises across the corporation. We'll be undertaking the 38th Annual Survey in May. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, thank you very much. So informative to see that our strategies and planning regime is working in our favor. I'm just on page 10, which I find really great, and looking at the how much employment is in each area. So it would be, I would just be interested to know the number, I know you're going to maybe not know this, how many core employment areas are there, or how many core in general are there? What's the total acreage, total hectares that those zoned lands comprise? Do you have that information? And then looking at downtown, you're giving that a zone. How many hectares is that? So just to see how hardworking these lands actually are.
The general employment areas comprise 2,094 hectares, and the core areas 5,984 hectares within the city.
2,094
in terms of general.
For general, and core is
5,984 hectares for core.
5,900?
And 84.
5,984 for core, right? And do you have any idea, how big is that zone that you're calling downtown? And I see you have south of Eastern considered to be in the downtown core employment area. Is that right, on page 10?
Through the chair, I'm sorry, I don't know the total area.
Well, the Portlands is there.
offhand.
I mean, through the chair, I think the downtown is 3% of the city's land area, and the city is, trying to remember, 200? The other point I would make is that it's apples and oranges.
I'm sorry, can't hear.
The other point I would make is that the downtown is a designation in the plan of different kinds of land uses.
Yes, but
whereas you're just trying to make a comparison.
I'm just making, geographically, you've set an area and you've called
Right.
that downtown.
Right.
So I think it's pretty interesting to just see how, of all of the acres in the whole land mass of the city of Toronto, just how hardworking some of these zones are in delivering employment. And I'm not sure everybody really understands that, because we see them as individual areas rather than, these are heavy lifting areas that are delivering what we need for the economy. And the rest of the city has small and different types of jobs. But for me, I just think we need to always drill down and be clearer with people just how hardworking these zones are, and really what a small footprint they have compared to the rest of the landmass in the city. So I am interested in knowing that for what you're calling the downtown. You've got the Portlands in there. There's not really a lot of people there yet, but that would be a forecast.
Through the chair, I'd also comment, just to reinforce the question around the diversity of the landscape of employment, if you call it that, the ecosystem of employment. It is such a vitally important part of our resilience, if you will, because literally when one sector is up, another sector might be down. So there's a lot of compensation that goes on. There are different characteristics of employment. Some are, they need a lot of space, they need a lot of land. Maybe it's a distribution warehouse, maybe it's a film studio. Maybe employment is changing and it can take place in an office building, whereas it used to take place in another form. So again, having different kinds of employment areas and mixed-use areas to support richly diverse employment profile that this survey reveals, it has proven to be vitally important to the long-term health of the city. The overall employment's grown by 3%. And it's been a steady, a kind of a good news story. And we saw, certainly during the recession in 2007-8, that the city did not get hit as hard as other geographies because of that resilience.
And the resilience of the manufacturing has not simply bottomed out. It's still existing.
That's
And
correct.
Many of
In
these
fact,
core employment areas, so maintaining them is quite vital to the overall economy.
yes, both large and small. I often point out hundreds of millions of dollars invested in Sanofi Pasteur up on Steeles
Pardon me, in which?
hundreds of millions of dollars invested in a pharmaceutical company up on Steeles, Sanofi
Yes.
Pasteur. Or opposite end is a small startup microbrewery in the East End. So you get everything in between, and again, it comes back to that diversity of our toolkit and our approach, which I think has proven to be wise.
Through the chair, the core employment areas represent 9.6% of the city's land area. The general employment areas, 3.3%, so a total of just under 13%, and yet 3 out of 10 jobs in the city are within the designated employment areas.
So they are very heavy lifters,
Yes, indeed.
need to be maintained. Thank you so much for that information.
Councillor Wong Tam.
The light is, oh, sorry, the light just went on. Thank you very much. With respect to the classification of core employment and general employment, can you explain the major difference?
Chair, I'll give you the definition from the official plan. General employment areas are places of business and economic activities, usually at the edges of the employment areas. And we permit the core areas, just bear with me for 1 second. Core are, again, similar, but we permit manufacturing, processing, warehousing, wholesaling, distribution, storage, transportation facilities, vehicle repair, offices, research, and development activities. And development facilities, waste management systems, industrial trade schools, media, information and technology, and vertical agriculture.
In the core?
In the core.
Yeah, that's a wide range.
Very wide range.
And very specific, but yet in the general employment category, it's not as specific, but vague enough that it could encompass those things.
And I wanted just to add, the major difference is retail is permitted in the general, up to a particular
The base. With respect to spatial clustering in your report, you talk about that there's a trend, perhaps it's not just in Canada but globally, that employment is not necessarily focused necessarily in the central business districts anymore. That is, it is going into other types of neighborhoods. What is causing this spatial clustering, where we're seeing the CBD not play that primary role anymore?
Through the chair, it's a combination of factors. It's not that the central business district, it doesn't have that specific role. That was in particular regards to the technology sector, where those firms are looking for access to a highly skilled labor force. So what they're really concerned about is access to transit. On the one hand, that enables them to attract that labor force, both regionally, hence the concentration in the downtown, but they're also looking for vibrant neighborhoods and urban areas. So there's a great importance to them of parks and community and social services, daycare, affordable office space, and that affordable office space is available in the office parks throughout the city. So that kind of employment activity is beginning to relocate given the distribution of that skilled labor force.
And would you say that in your firm interviews about some of the concerns that headhunters, as those who make decisions on relocation of the headquarters, that they've cited that perhaps the central business district is a bit monolithic in culture, it's sort of missing that inclusive community that they're looking on the edges of the east and west of the Kings? They don't necessarily want to work in a tower necessarily, but in the creative built form that's more post and beam with a legacy history. Like they cited that those are one other conditions that they were looking for when making their decision. Is that correct?
Through the chair, it's a combination of things. Yes, indeed, that they're looking for interesting workspaces such as brick and beam, but they're also looking for A-class and B-class space, which is affordable. A key concern was the flexibility of that space, of not getting tied into significant leases of large office space. So it's a combination of the amenities, the urban design, the vibrancy of the area, as well as that the services and the flexibility of the space from a business perspective.
If we were to remain competitive locally, but also regionally and internationally, what do the major asset holders in the financial district need to do to capture some of this creative magic, the innovation, that sort of pixie dust that's being spread all over Liberty Village? How do we bring that creative class into the core?
Through the chair, in addition to what Michael has commented on, what I've seen is towers and financial district landlords wearing the clothes of the other areas that you're describing, Councillor, literally deconstructing their offices. I know that there are some C and B class buildings, and instead of renovating them up to an A, they actually take out the ceilings, expose the pipes, and make it feel like brick and beam. So you can tell that, you know, and I'm not a market expert, but you can tell how people are responding in different geographies to what they feel attracts tenants. And we saw this the other day at a press conference at The Score, which has grown into the second largest digital sports app in North America after ESPN. Rapidly expanding. They won't even sign a long-term lease because they just don't know where they'll be tomorrow. They're expanding so fast. So that kind of flexibility of space is something that the owners of buildings in the financial district, I think, you're getting more used to as well. Back in the day, they may have had 5 floors of, you know, $1,000 an hour lawyers, and now it's something else entirely, a different profile, as well as mixing in amenities. You can see a coffee shop in the ground floor of the Commerce Court, for example. Yeah. And all of that mixing that you've described and that kind of touch and feel stuff that attracts people is something that is really blending the character of all of our employment areas.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, appreciate all the hard work on this. I think it's something that everybody really looks forward to every year and gives us the kind of most interesting data on the economic health of the city. With that in mind, I'm wondering how we share this data with other partners in the city, partners outside of the city, how we can take advantage of all this great work and help leverage other studies going forward. How do we do that each year?
Through the chair, we provide this information to other city divisions as required for citywide studies and analysis. In particular, economic development and culture, who has a complete set of the information for their internal work. We provide this through the Transit Expansion Office to the individual consultants working with Metrolinx on particular exercises. We use this information in building the long-range employment projections that are shared with Toronto Water and both the sewer and the water main teams. We provide the same data to the TTC directly so that they can use it for transit planning. It's also used in the development charges background study for the construction of the long-range employment and development information that's included there. And it's also built into our official plan work and our consultation with stakeholders across the city.
What about academic institutions, universities, think tanks, policy shops? Do they use this? Do we share that with them?
We do. We provide a research request service, and we receive multiple requests from the academic community and the institutional sector, in particular, interested in particular research questions. So we'll extract for them, suitable information and aggregated data and provide it to them.
Okay. Page 8. I thought this was really interesting. Toronto added 522 new retail establishments and nearly 2,400 retail jobs. This is a good data point because it kind of flies counter to the narrative that retail is collapsing in Toronto. Certainly that's something that we talk about in the East End. I'm wondering how, you mentioned that we share and work closely with ECDEV. How does this data feed into their strategies? Retail employment, for example, are we seeing does this demonstrate that we're seeing an uptake in brick and mortar retail, or is it just the sort of growth that we would see from a growing city? I guess, is there something actually happening here with respect to retail, or is it just growth growth in general in the city is translating into more retail establishments?
Through the chair, we provide this information to economic development through a number of exercises. First, the entire set of information, but also we participated with them in their Main Streets Retail project, where some of this information is an input into that exercise. We are identifying the base data in terms of employment, what business establishments are growing where, and it's information used by the economic development officers at reaching out to the individual subsectors in order to help them communicate, identify common suppliers and related interest. I can't speak to some of the specifics you're pointing out about retail. That would be a question for economic development.
Just to supplement, and Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I think a lot of the retail growth we're seeing is in food and beverage. Is that? That's the segment that is bumping up quite a bit. That's, are less people cooking at home kind of thing. It's the rise of food delivery and all of that we're seeing, that dynamic. I made a comment the other day that what's really important for our main streets is to design it for the long term so that we have the form correct, so that we know that retail will change over time. It always has had changed. We need to design our buildings and our public spaces so that they support healthy street life, safe street life, and walkability, relationships to transit and biking. So all of these things are really important ingredients. The tenant side of who comes and goes in these buildings and these places will rise and fall and ebb and flow over time with trends. What's really important, though, is why are people continuing to go to the Danforth? Why are they continuing to go to the Junction? Why are they continuing to shop on streets? It's because we're putting a lot of coordinated effort into the place, into the way that the neighborhood works, to try to keep them inclusive and attractive for people to want to locate businesses in those locations. So again, we can't control the whole world, certainly. The market is going to determine a lot of these factors, but setting it up for success is a lot of the focus that we try to put on it.
So this would be my last question really quickly. Subsector trends year over year. So we have X amount of increase in retail this year. If you extrapolate that and look at that over the past decade, I don't know what those percentages are, but we have planning policies, for example, retail at grade, mid-rise development on our avenues. Would we take this data and look at those sort of policies that we have from a planning framework and consider that? I guess the question I'm getting at is, from a planning perspective, would it still be our position that we want to see retail at grade in every single mid-rise building on an avenue, despite increasing retail vacancies on our main streets?
Through the chair, I think that is a very good question. The effort over the years has been to focus our retail at grade in I'll call it continuous concentrations of retail, where the introduction of new non-retail uses at grade would really disrupt and change the character of some of these retail streets. So I think there's been some really good local planning studies where we've done some picking and choosing, if you will, about where we should stick to having continuous retail and where we should allow for some more flexibility. And that's the importance of doing some local planning studies. We see across the city that there are different kinds of retail strips, and the continuous nature of some of them is, quite frankly, more important than it is on other streets. We know, for example, on Roncesvalles, it's largely a one-sided retail street works really well, and that's a very unusual condition. So I think that local lens is really important to determining how far we go and how stringent we are with a regulatory approach.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Councillor Bradford just covered a lot of what I wanted to cover. Thank you. Those were important questions. Before I come back to what Councillor was on about, I just wanted to ask directly. So I'm noticing that a lot of our employment areas carry a lot of the weight. How much are these very healthy trends at risk because of the provincial changes to how employment areas work?
So through the chair, the PZ report that we did in February of 2019 outlined some of those risks. We had a growth plan amendment that identified the inclusion of 66% of our employment areas in provincially significant employment zones. However, left 33% of our employment areas out of those PZs. That represents 180,000 jobs of the plus 400,000 jobs that are employment areas. So we advised council that there was considerable concern about destabilizing a third of our employment areas in that report. And we continue to monitor the situation and will continue to monitor it as we bring forward our growth plan conformity exercise. That exercise is going to be put through this committee starting, I believe, in March with an update report on where we are with that work. And suffice to say, we continue to be concerned that we do not destabilize a significant number of jobs in 1/3 of our employment areas that are identified in this report as growing. We don't want to be, doing this in a haphazard way. There may be some areas, and we reported on those, that are more marginal and could be considered for mixed use, provided we maintain jobs. But we do not want to start destabilizing, certainly, the core of our employment land strategy.
In this study, is there any work done about how we are doing relative to other GTA municipalities?
Through the chair, not as a part of this study, no.
Not this part. There is some work. Do we ever see that? I'll tell you why I'm asking. It's taken as given that Toronto needs to change the relative tax rates between commercial, industrial, and residential because if we don't do that, jobs will flee to York Region. And the numbers I'm seeing here suggests that no, maybe the jobs aren't fleeing to York Region. And I'm just wondering, council has some policy. I realize there's provincial legislation, but council has some additional policy around this. And I'm looking at something that says that the job growth is actually even faster than population growth. So we must be competitive.
Through the chair, I would just comment that it's important to align the financial strategy of the city with land use planning and transit planning. And we see the value of that alignment here where we're, and I'm not an expert on tax, but if we keep our eye on our competitive tax position with, especially in industrial sectors and manufacturing sectors, which are holding their own, if we supply a network of transit, if we improve that network of transit across the city to improve the access to opportunity to many people as possible, if we continue to focus on building resilient and complete communities, all of that kind of comes into the mix, into our competitive position in the region. Certainly it's a regional economy. We're not always in competition. Sometimes we're quite synergistic with the whole region. But it is important to as I said earlier, to keep the economy diverse and highly flexible for the long-term resilience of this community.
Okay.
Through the chair, I would add that the vacancy rate for office space in the city is much lower than that than the GTA as a whole, and industrial vacancy rates in the city and the GTA are comparable, demonstrating a continuing demand for the spaces that we have. And through our other bulletin, How Does the City Grow?, we comment on the amount of development activity that's been occurring throughout the city, and as I recall, we note the significant growth of much of the new office space in the GTA is actually within Toronto.
Huh. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I do have some questions. So this is a picture of the trends up to today. Are you seeing anything that will indicate that any changes in the forecast, that, that any of these areas that we've been seeing growth, that there might be some challenges ahead? Is there anything that is indicating that?
Through the chair, based on past trends and the information that we've collected, there's nothing that indicates any specific cause. Economists will continue to identify the susceptibility of the economy to increases in the interest rate, which could cause development to slow, potential slowing of international migration, though world circumstances would seem to suggest otherwise. Toronto remains a particularly attractive place within the country and within the world.
But for example, in these categories, you expect a steady, you don't expect, there's nothing in the forecast that would say, you know, manufacturing is more at risk than normal that we've been seeing, because we're actually seeing, you know, a stagnation, but we haven't seen a huge dip. Like you actually even mentioned that actually in the last 6 years, we had 6,000 jobs added, so.
Through the chair, through yourself, we've actually, as you noted, added manufacturing employment. So over a longer period of time, in terms of the trend information, manufacturing within the city and generally in North America, as in terms of goods production, has been declining with the shift into services. But even at that, manufacturing is diversifying. The nature of manufacturing itself is changing. Oh. So based on past trends, the growth seems to be strong and likely to continue. Okay. The provincial growth plan forecasts are being reviewed at the moment, and the employment forecasts for the city are likely to increase as a result of that exercise.
Okay. Through the chair, if I could also just add that the stability of the employment areas, the knowledge that a company can make a long-term investment, that they're not going to be threatened by land use change,
that's a big indication.
Has been something that has been raised directly to us by TIN and others as we go through this employment lens. I would say, and we don't have a strong data point on this, but I would say that the affordability of housing has a strong connection. It's kind of a more relevant for some sectors than others, but I think it's a real tension, which is why we need to make those connections through this committee on how employment and housing is related.
So as we do this survey, do we actually question some of these businesses? What are the most important factors? So for example, manufacturing, like the protection of that core employment is crucial. It's really important. You know, maybe the IT is actually being in a more diverse area. So how do you actually look for some of these indications and to understand where these jobs would like to be placed and how we can use our land use policy to ensure that they are maintained and they grow in the city?
So Michael can add to this, but yes, we deliberately did a deep dive on the tech sector this year, and we did ask them those questions, and I think we got both a high-level answer around, and we're all familiar with these factors, healthcare, safe city, civil society, these types of things. That happens at a macro level, but at a local level, we hear about access to skilled labor, we hear about transit, and Michael, maybe you can identify those specific areas.
In terms of the technology sector specifically, it was those particular activities in terms of the vibrancy of the local neighborhood, the provision of community and social services, in particular affordable daycare, access to transit, restaurants, cafes, and the vibrancy of urban life, the quality of the urban design, the quality of the spaces. For the employment survey as a whole, we aren't asking all the 76,000 establishments about their preferences, but we focused on specific sectors.
Yeah, I would also add and we were talking earlier about the downtown. Why the downtown continues to be so powerful is that it draws two labor markets. It draws a local labor market on foot, transit. It draws a regional labor market through Union Station. It is the only area in the GTA that has that level of access. It's the only area. Building up more transit hubs, building up the transit network will, at least in theory, build competition, if you will, for that concentration of labor access. That's why you hear a lot of talk at the airport, for example, about an airport transit hub, because already we have tens of thousands of people working in that general area, but it is not very transit friendly. A lot of people arrive there by car. So improving the transit connectivity there and in other areas and recreating that nexus, if you will, that we have downtown is so important, why it's so important building up the transit network.
Yeah. The reason for my question is that, for example, you just mentioned the daycare, and I know that, yes, for a lot of people is extremely important. And for us to, when we do the land use, to understand where are we allowing or not allowing things like daycares, for example, might be important. I keep hearing from a lot of tech companies, you know, with the large floor plates. It's huge nowadays, opens large floor plates. So how can we make sure that we're actually pushing for those things that we're hearing from some of these employers that are settling in there? I hope that we're able to get this from this survey. Just two questions completely out of curiosity. Do we know the ratio of employees to retired people in the City of Toronto?
Not offhand, no.
No?
Through the chair, that's not a figure I'm familiar with.
Okay. It'll be really interesting to understand if that actually how that is playing out. The other thing is, how do you measure construction jobs?
That is
Totally out of curiosity. Is it the companies registered in Toronto, or is it the work that is being done in Toronto, or like?
Through the chair, it's actually a bit of both. One of the challenges of an establishment-based survey such as ours is that we're going to the place of work and we're asking how many people work there. So for certain businesses, construction is a case in point, taxi companies, security companies, employment agencies, they have workers that are potentially all across the city and elsewhere. So we ask the individual firms how many people are actually working at that location. And in the case of, for example, the taxi companies, the real estate offices, we're also asking how many people are actually, check in at that head office location. If they do, we count them at the head office because otherwise they're completely mobile. In the cases of some sectors, for example, the security guard companies, they're actually placed at a particular office or industrial site where they might be working. And if we can identify that distinction, we will count them at that location. That becomes particularly important for transit planning because we actually need to know where the workers are, not where they're counted from. So part of the adjustments that we make to the employment survey over time is when we get refined counts from the establishments about how many part-time workers they really have at a particular location. Are they actually there? Are they actually checking in there? Or are they really somewhere else? And that's part of the challenge of an establishment-based instrument. We started out by counting simply temporary workers. We now distinguish between temporary workers and volunteers. They have different characteristics. We don't count the volunteers as employment, but they do affect transit demand. So it's another kind of flexible variation in people moving across the city. We also try and distinguish between, as the Chief Planner was describing, in terms of the tech sector, that flexible floor plate and that notion of the needs of those kinds of businesses. There's an increasing number of what we've identified as co-working locations, where there are business establishments that are not landlords in the conventional sense, but they have completely fit-up space, and they will lease to you, in effect, the access to a cubicle or a computer or some services or a meeting room for hours, days, or weeks in order to provide that kind of flexibility. And in 2020, we'll be looking in more detail at co-working locations to try and understand that a bit better.
Capture that as well. Okay.
Through the chair, all of your ward profiles have something called the dependency ratio, I think on the first or second page of your ward profile. And it gets at your question about employees to retirees. So the dependency ratio is how many people in that ward are below a certain age or above a certain age. I think it's above 65 and below 18 or 17. But it gives you a snapshot of a surrogate for how many people might be in the workforce. What's very interesting about Toronto is that there are completely different worlds inside Toronto, as you know. Scarborough Asian Court, I think it's plus 70, not in the workforce. King Spadina, it's 70% in the workforce. So completely different profiles, and I'd invite you to look at your ward profiles to understand that more.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks. Any speakers on this item? Seeing none, any councillors to speak on this item? Seeing none? Oh, Councillor Perks.
So I've been on planning for a little while now, and every year I learn something from this report, so I just wanted to say thank you. I think this is one of the most important pieces of work the City of Toronto does. One little thought, but Councillor Bradford raised some very interesting questions about the viability of our at-grade retail, given that Toronto has more of it per capita than anyone else, and it's a particular vulnerable business sector. There are questions around how we are planning our transit in terms of our workforce growth. All of those, there are a number of policy impact pieces that come out of the dry analysis here. And I'm just hoping maybe in future, some of those, for those councillors who don't read everything, a summary of some of the trends that we should be aware of as a governing body in decision making in the coming years would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No more speakers? Well, thanks. Thank you to staff. This is great, great work and informative. And if I could just add as well to what Councillor Perth was saying in terms of the trends, I do think it is important to have a little bit of a slide snapshot, and also what some of these things that we're hearing from the businesses that are coming and how we can take in consideration some of this feedback as we're developing planning policies. I mean, this survey is to inform the work that we do here. So I think that for you to emphasize to council some of the important things that you're seeing and that we need to keep our eye on the ball will be really important. So thank you. Receive? To adopt. Okay. Councillor Bradford, all those in favor? That carries. Item 12.3, City Planning Division Study Work Plan. We have speakers on this item. Jeff Cattell.
Is this overhead work?
Good morning, Jeff.
Morning.
And you can start.
You know how the overhead works?
There's some assistance coming.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Cattell. I'm co-chair with Kathy McDonald of the Federation of North Toronto Resident Associations. Here today to give some comments in support of the Planning Division's study work program, recognizing that the studies that the division carries out, I mean, we just heard from one kind of a study, I guess, an analytical data-driven study, but the work of the division is basically divided into two. It's studies and which lead to plans, to actual plans, which lead to legislation, lead to official plan amendments, to zoning bylaw amendments, and so on. They're really critical for the providing an infrastructure for the second part of the division, which is to review the applications for development. So it's really, from our perspective, we really support this mandate of the division to do studies and develop plans. So they include such things as avenue studies, secondary plans, zoning bylaw updates, heritage conservation district studies, community heritage resource assessments, CHRA, which are new innovation in the last 5 years, and neighborhood-specific design guidelines. The underlying principle is that the study program strengthens the position of the city in dealing with development applications. Unfortunately, the waiting lists for studies and plans are long and appear to be getting longer. In order to assess part of the study work program, we've extracted and collated the piece of, hundreds of those studies related, just pulled out the ones related to HCDs, well, related to heritage. In other words, HCDs, CHRAs, and looked at that. Oh, sorry, it is that way. Really, the report divides things into three categories. It divides into a forecast, what can be done this year, And in the case of heritage, there are 5 plans that are being worked on this year. Hearings, in other words, the stuff going to the LPAT and defending the plan against appeals. And then what's called active beyond 2020. Presumably that means studies that will continue. They're going to definitely move ahead in this year, next year. And then the third category is on hold. And so we just pulled out the ones related to heritage, and if you see there's a dozen studies there which are on hold. And this is to comment on those. For example, 2 projects from North York, Lawrence Park West HCD and the Leaside CHRA. In both cases, they were authorized in 2014. They're now shown as on hold. This time last year, they were live. They were part of the active work program plan. They were supposed to happen this year. And now all of a sudden we see them pushed off into the future. So there's a symptom here of a problem. In addition, the neighborhood design guidelines template, which commenced in 2016, is now scheduled to be completed in 2020. I recall discussing with staff, and I was told it was going to be done, well, last summer, and here we are, it's still not done. So in the meantime, in the case of this neighborhood stuff, the neighborhoods are left without policies and tools to protect their built form. Every 2 weeks, the Committee of Adjustment allows projects that do not fit the established character of the community, and if refused, they're likely to be allowed by the Toronto Local Appeal Body. Something like 80% of Toronto Local Appeal Body, they end up approving something that was turned down at the C of A. So there's a risk that eventually, when the tools and policies are undertaken, it may become difficult to demonstrate the prevalence of the character, causing them to be unique and placed on the list and authorized by the city in the first place. So we have a problem here. This kind of concern is not restricted to North York or to heritage. This was just an example. But to the city generally and to various types of plans. Meanwhile, city planning is facing the biggest threat to its ability to manage development applications with the announced issuance of the regulations pertaining to the province's legislative changes
Jeff, I'm going to have
for planning and heritage under Bill 108. And can I have some more time?
I'm sorry, you're 30 seconds over, so I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
Well, okay. That's coming out in July. This will disrupt city planning's agenda in ways that at this point we're not fully aware.
Thank you.
The compressed deadlines for regular applications following an increased number of planning appeals will inevitably put pressure on citywide and area planning.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Jeff, for your deputation. So at the core of your deputation, I'm sure there's a request. What is your request of this committee today?
The request is that City Council provide funds to allow for planning studies to be maintained and increased, despite the disruption caused by provincial legislative changes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thanks for joining us today, Jeff. Thank you. And next speaker, Marcia Stone. Good morning, Marcia.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Marcia Stone, and I'm a member of ACORN. ACORN is a membership organization of low and moderate income people fighting for social and economic justice. Housing is the biggest issue for our members. Creating and protecting affordable housing should be a priority for Toronto. Since we are here at the Planning Committee, and it's part of the mandate that, maintaining and creating housing that's affordable, we would just like to say that there was important progress made last year through Housing Now, Rent Safe TO, and 10-year housing plan. ACORN members were deeply involved because it directly affects them. We need to make sure, though, that any new development getting public funds creates actual affordable housing. That means real rent control as requirement in these developments. Rent control means a maximum increase at or below the guideline. More importantly, real rent control means closing the vacancy decontrol loophole. Landlords have an incentive.
Marcia, I'm going to have to interrupt you. So you're saying very valuable thing, but the item is on the City Planning Division study work plan. So if you can keep your deputation to comment on their work plan,
okay,
that would be greatly appreciated.
So it's important with your work plan that these things that we've been fighting for, basically all I'm saying is that we're at a point right now that major changes can be made. So with your work plan and your rent safe and your all these things that's going on in the city, it's an opportunity for council to put forward and maintain the actions and things that we've approved earlier. And it's important that we make sure that those things are included in the work plan. And that's basically all I have to say, is to make sure that we keep it. And just one quick thing. I know that recently New Westminster, BC, just passed some laws with regard to zone buildings for rental are required to have vacancy control, inclusionary zoning, and landlord licensing. So when we do our work, which I know you guys do, you do a lot of networking with other states or other provinces, whatever, to get the best outcomes that you would expect. So maybe look at networking or, have a look at that as part of the work plan, right? And that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marcia, and we appreciate always ACORN's participation on the various studies and work that is done here at the city. Next, we have Bob Murphy. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning. My name is Bob Murphy. I am the chair of ACORN York Southweston. I'm also a renter, and I'm also a tenant. I also been previously have been a property manager in Weston, and I think it's obvious that there's been a kind of a change in the agenda, but we were told there'd be a report on rent control on the developments receiving public funds at this committee meeting. So we have mentioned to our ACORN members to come out and join us in solidarity of attending this meeting. I believe there was a motion by Councillor Bradford at the December's council meeting that this issue was going to be addressed today. We as ACORN members want to be engaged. Low-income and moderate tenants want to be engaged.
So, Bob, you're absolutely right. There was a motion that was put. The report was not ready, and this agenda became public as it is about a week ago. The item is not on the agenda. So, again, I ask that we comment on this, and we'll be very happy to hear your comments, and hopefully the discussions are happening with you on this item when this comes at the agenda. And our agendas always get published about a week before. They're public, and so you're welcome to check the agenda on actually the reports that will be presented in the committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bob. And I'm sure we'll see you when that report comes through.
We'll be back.
Thank you. I'm sure you will. And we're looking forward to seeing you. Thank you. Okay, there's no more speakers on this item.
Just a point of order, and I thank all the members of Acorn for coming. I'm disturbed that that was Councillor Bradford's motion that had a specific date, and it was this meeting, and nowhere is that reflected that that report was to be here, but it won't be at this particular meeting, and that happens a bit. I'm not sure how you'd like to deal with that, or the clerk would like to deal with that, but I don't think we can have that happen all the time, because look at all the people that thought that was going to be on because that motion said it was going to be today. And might not have been listed on the agenda, but some notification that it would not be adhered at this committee should have been on that.
Yeah.
So can you tell me, or have maybe the deputy city manager can tell us how that happens, that there's no even recognition that it was to be here, but it won't be at this meeting, it will be at X meeting? Or
So through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure what a mechanism would be to publicly advise people of reports not being put on agendas despite the direction. I'm not sure what that would be. I've been informed the report that all you wonderful folks are looking for is targeted for March. We have a new person coming in to run our housing secretariat, and I understand that it will be one of her first tasks is to review those outstanding items and look at getting them onto the agendas. I was just looking for it here, and I don't see it listed as yet. So, you know, certainly great comment, great question. I'm not sure what that process would look like. Certainly we can talk to clerks and see what could be done.
I will follow up. It really does have
A very rough draft list.
It really will have to be there, and whether or not a suggestion is that your task would be to send a letter to the chair saying that's not going to be on at this report, it will be coming in another time, might not be all on the clerk, but at least it would be a piece of correspondence to the committee about something that the committee asked to have at a certain time. And if that doesn't happen, then it seems very disrespectful of committee motions. It seems disrespectful when people have asked for things, and we have a very poor practice here, which I think needs to be fixed.
So, Councillor, I think you're right on saying that this is not the first time that has happened, and it's something that needs to be dealt with clerks. This committee is not in the purview of change that process. It is something that happens not only in this committee, it happens in all committees, and maybe it is something that we as a council with our staff need to grapple with and work towards. But the clerks also reminded me as well that the agenda does get published a week before. Now, we're not happy. We complain about this all the time, that we think a report is coming through and then we find out is not. I think most of us probably have been in that situation, and that is an issue that we most likely should deal with it.
I'm just going to say, Madam Chair, I'm not putting this all on the clerks.
No.
This is a report through the staff back to the committee. And if it can't be here, I don't think it's the clerks that say there's no report, or maybe it's the clerks with the DCM, whoever is sitting in this chair, that says that report will be coming at a later date, not to this committee. We have to let's fix it at our committee, and then everybody else can have the same fix. We can. I believe we can. And I've heard that again. That's happened too many times, and maybe published, but sometimes there's a supplemental. Sometimes things come on at the last minute, and maybe that's what they're expecting. So this number of people are here based on a request to this committee, and which we passed. So I feel responsible that there's no notification, don't bother coming today, that's going to be a different day. And we need to have that fixed. It's not right.
And Madam Chair,
I understand, but we are in item 12.3, City Planning Division Study Work Plan. I would like to continue with the agenda. If there's something that has to be fixed, I'm happy to speak with you outside and see how we can fix this. I honestly think this is a bigger problem than just this committee. It happens in all the committees. And maybe we as a council need to have a process for when things like this happen. But I would like to continue with the agenda, finish the agenda, and understanding and recognizing the issue.
Only 30 seconds, and just say that I'm happy to take this on. I have a motion tracker in my office. We are constantly recognizing that things are falling through the cracks. So I'm happy to work with anybody here to address this matter, not just for this committee, but for council. We've been giving a lot of thought on how to ensure there's greater accountability.
There you go.
I'll take the lead and I'll work with Tracy, yourself, and anybody else in this committee to see if we can put something forward the next meeting.
So, sorry, just through you, Madam Chair, just to close this off, I appreciate the frustration, understand. One of the efforts we are doing is better tracking on deadlines, but I just have to say that there is a large volume of outstanding work.
Yes.
And almost every committee or council meeting, we get additional report requests. So we're running into a capacity problem. We don't have an endless supply of people to write reports. So we recognize the need, we recognize the desire, and we also recognize the commitments, but we also have to recognize capacity. So we're going to do a better job at seeing what that looks like, give you some information on it, but certainly the accountability. The accountability back on deadlines is something absolutely we own.
I'll work with you.
Absolutely, we own that.
We're on it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, point of order? I need to talk about this. I wasn't going to, but someone just pushed one of my buttons. So first, there is an agenda tracker. The city manager has it. He knows every request for every report that council or committee members have made. I have asked every year, actually I forgot to this year, when members of council will have access to this, and I've been told by successive city managers that no, members of council can't have access to it. So you don't need to take it on, Councillor Wong-Tam. It exists. We just need the public service to give it to us. The second thing that's on my mind, and from what I've just heard, is right now we are deliberating around the city's budget. And every year, I note that general managers and deputy city managers say that the staff that they have been allocated in the budget allocation is adequate to deliver the services that council wants to have delivered. You cannot say that and simultaneously say we do not have enough people to write the reports that you're asking us for.
Okay. Can we please get, appreciating everybody's comments, I would like to get back on track to City Planning Division study work plan. And any questions of staff? Councillor Bradford.
So try and, through the chair, segue, maybe we can talk a little bit about capacity, as it's all a little bit related here. Thanks to the folks for Acorn for coming down today, and apologies for the miscommunication, but grateful that you're here. So on the capacity note, I think so much of city planning as a division, the work that's undertaken is done in partnership with other divisions. You know, a good example of that, of course, was the housing plan, a Herculean lift that's been underway for many, many months. How is that work that's interdivisional in nature captured in the work program?
Through the speaker, through the chair, I think it's captured perhaps not directly in relation to your question. And what I'll say is that there are many projects listed in the work program that the division, City Planning Division leads, and many projects where we're in support. So it provides a comprehensive picture of both of those kinds of projects. So for example, transportation services may be leading a transportation master plan, and we would support that with land use planning input and other inputs. Whereas we may be leading a planning framework, for example, the Yonge and Eglinton review that we did. Very large comprehensive study where we have partners from many, many divisions and agencies participating on a team. So that's the answer I can give you. We have not spelled that out specifically because this is our, what's on our plate divisionally. We could always break that down further, but it would be a considerable amount of work to give you that next layer down.
So I get and appreciate that the lens here is really planning as lead on the study work program, but I do think it would be important for city planning to account for that work. It is it's quite a significant amount of work that we ask and other divisions ask of you, and really important work, but that's not necessarily reflected in the work program here. So I just think that makes it challenging to reflect that in resources and staff time and in priorities. Like Danforth study, for example, big city planning lift there, 3 divisions led by transportation planning, as just an example here in the East End right now.
Yes, through the chair again, I think the work program does reflect both kinds of projects. And what we could look toward as we refine these annual reports every year, we could look toward adding at least an indicator of whether or not something is high, medium, or low in terms of its dependencies on other divisions. Some of them are quite light, some of them are a lot heavier. So we can look toward making that improvement in our next version.
I think it would just be helpful to understand that level of effort, and that the word that you just said, interdependencies, I wasn't even thinking about that, but sometimes work on work programs doesn't proceed. The civic capital improvement stuff, like some of those things don't advance because of interdependencies on other divisions as well, which isn't necessarily reflected in a report or when you ask for an update on a project. And there's good reasons for that, but it doesn't actually translate. The next thing I wanted to touch on was thematically the report is really focusing on the implementation of the plans where the study work has been done, so Yonge and Eglinton or TO Core. What I'm interested in is how we're capturing the lessons learned on implementation so that we can apply them to study areas across the city. And the specific example I'm interested in is Main Street planning study that we just wrapped, a lot of really good work there. And now we're working with multiple landowners to get them to come to the table so that we can implement that together. There have been experiences with city planning across the city where that's been done. Lower Yonge precinct plan is one that comes top of mind. How do we make sure that the lessons from those are transferred to the different staff in the different units and sections within city planning?
Through the chair, that's a great question. That's something that we're quite mindful of in considering how many work project items we have and the themes that they tend to cover. For example, we know across the city that there are 20, in the order of 20 large mall sites that are in various states of play. And we, I think, have developed quite a repertoire of experience around how to approach the redevelopment of those opportunities. We have lessons learned, debriefings all the time. We have sessions with staff in different disciplines in different districts, and bringing together other divisions to reflect on our experiences and grow our repertoire in the type of work that we do. It is something has been something very much part of our Avenue Study program. And certainly, as time has gone on, one of the big themes that we've tried to advance is connecting growth and infrastructure growth. So we're trying very much to work differently and plug it into ultimately the program and service planning that different groups do. Interestingly enough, we just had a meeting with the TDSB yesterday about helping them do their service planning because they're under such pressure to build new schools and improve the capacity of what they provide this city. Yet they are legislatively disconnected from, and from an authority's point of view, disconnected from what we experience at the city. So working with our partners, it is very much a very constant part of everything that we do around transferring that knowledge and those experiences.
Okay, thanks for all your hard work.
There are a couple of pieces that I was looking for in the work plan and didn't find. Today, we were supposed to have a report on rooming houses that has a planning piece, and I see nothing in the work. I don't see the report, and I see nothing in the work plan. Is planning participating in work on getting a report to council on rooming houses?
Through the chair, I'm surprised that you're saying that it's not in here for.
I'm looking at projects, which is where I assume it would be on page 26. Because it's not an OP, I looked under zoning bylaw.
Page 25, zoning bylaw, zoning for multi-tenant housing.
Multi-tenant housing. Okay, all right.
That is.
So that's in your work plan?
That is in the work plan. We are.
And it was scheduled to be here today?
It was originally thought of that we might be here today, is scheduled for March. The report is largely.
March now, okay.
The report is largely complete, and we're doing some additional work to make sure that it's as robust as we can make it.
Okay, thank you. Under environmental implementation, and I may, like, part of this is, I know it's really hard to find categories for what you do because what you do tends to be multifaceted. So not finding things in the right place is my fault. But I'm looking at environmental implementation and I don't see any work around transform TO. I know that we've recently increased the burden on staff, for which it would be nice if we had sufficient staff, to do work in imagining a future with no fossil fuels. And a key piece of that obviously has got to be the transportation work. I'm wondering, are you accounting for that?
Through the chair, I would say that we're accounting for it in, not in a line item, if you will, but in two ways. One is applying a transform TO lens to a comprehensive planning study that we might be doing. So for example, if we're doing a neighborhood study, we'll be looking to advance the goals and objectives of transform TO. And that manifests itself through various specific considerations in that neighborhood. So it's very much part of a lens that we would apply in that type of work. Another general area, though, is on more specific implementation devices that you might nest under transform TO, but we've taken on the lead for it. So, for example, when we publish the next round of Toronto Green Standard, when we're implementing a transform TO objective through a guideline device that we have. On page 26, for example, we've listed 3 more specific items where we're advancing implementation of transform TO around air quality and climate change, around ravine strategy implementation, and resilient city policy framework. So we're, to summarize, we're capturing it in 2 ways. Generally in work that we do on comprehensive planning and more specifically on more tactile or tactical projects.
Okay, I hear you, and I'm glad that that's there, but don't you think that given that Council has said we need to have a fossil-free or a carbon-neutral city, that a couple of dimensions of how the city does its routine work need major planning policy development. And I will give you 2 examples. One, there's a report coming on electric vehicles to Council, and I had concerns about the goals set in there and whether or not they were informed by any thinking on how many vehicles there are going to be. Like, we shouldn't build out infrastructure if we're getting people out of cars. And I asked them this, and they said, well, we rely on what planning tells us. But given that we are Council is changing what we want to achieve, wouldn't you have to go back and do your transportation modeling with different goals? Because we can't get to fossil-free with the vehicle fleet size that we're imagining as little as a year ago. The second piece is, you may have noted the City of San Francisco has stopped approving buildings that have natural gas hookup as part of their climate plan. Every single development application that we do has a natural gas hookup. And that's a big piece of development application review that's going to require some policy work. How do we get to ground source heating? How do we get to district energy? All that kind of stuff. And how does that inform our area studies and secondary plans? So those are two examples where council's recent decision would put a new challenge to staff to develop planning policy, and that's why I was concerned not to see it here. Wouldn't you agree?
If I could comment through the chair, we are on the EV strategy, electric vehicle strategy team with Transportation Services who are participating on that. Transportation Services is the lead on that. I don't believe, or I haven't read the specific work program that I would call the Transform TO work program, but I would expect that long list of tactics and projects might be a place where we could begin to see where we're aligning and where there might be gaps, so we'll certainly have a look at that. On the natural gas hookup, I would only say that we have, through the implementation, I'm just going to say through the implementation of the Green Standard and its iterations over the years, and I think we're on number 4? Yeah, we're on 3. What we have done with the Green Standard is push the envelope. Each time we published it, we've gone farther than what might otherwise be required, maybe in the building code or in other guidelines, and we've advanced that agenda of green building standards, and we're going to continue to do that, I think, and we provide a kind of a carrot and stick approach in that, where we require certain things, and then we provide incentives to go to the next level through our DC credit on Tier 2. So, things like natural gas hookups, which begin to push the edge again, are things that we can continue to look at. I don't know that I, right now, today, would have a legislative basis to start denying people approvals based on a natural gas hookup. That's something, no, I don't. But what we've been doing with the carrot and stick and the Green Standard is pushing the envelope and getting people to go greener and greener, because obviously we've got a greenhouse gas emission issue that is significant.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I just want to say how helpful it is to see everything laid out. And I know it's a lot of work. I'm going to assume it's on a program, not paper. And I'm going to ask, is it possible, and somehow there's a big echo in here, somebody else must have a mic on. Is it possible to break out the ones that are ward-based, where taking down to another level? Particularly, I will ask this because of the now size of everybody's wards, and some of these things, I thought, oh yeah, that's there, but I don't think we should have to track absolutely everything in that way. It would be very helpful to have it tracked by city ward.
It's something that we could look at. As you likely are aware, some projects are in ward and some are
Yes,
larger
they
than
are
that.
here.
So, we'll look at whether we can provide that layer. It's something that might be straightforward. Again, we've enhanced this document every year, so we'll take that as something we can look at for next year's document. And certainly, if you want something offline based on what's going on in your ward, we're happy to provide that.
That would be great. And do you provide as well to ward councillors annually just a list of all of the active applications and their status?
Well, we've gone to the user-based system, as you may know, where we have a very robust application information center, which is published online. It's refreshed every night on all applications going on across the city. Anyone can draw or run a report, so to speak, from that application information center that will give you a list of whatever geography you want of what's going on with applications in that geography. So it's been set up as a self-serve model so that we can get away from the work required of producing, one-off lists. And it's very, I think, user-friendly, and it's something that we'd be happy to sit with your staff and walk them through so that they're able to produce whatever report you would like.
It's not so much the perusal of the reports, it's kind of the status.
That's exactly what it does. It provides a live update of the status of those applications.
And I'm not sure that with the bigger wards that's been taken into account, going through and publishing those rather than have them provided. Did you take into account the bigger wards for our work?
I think I may ask you to restate your question, but there's the project work program, which is what this report is about, planning studies, if you will. Then I believe you asked me a question about applications, development applications.
This is the planning study one, which I think that even then, if it's ward-based, that's important.
That's
because
what we
there
can
are
provide to you,
brand-new wards,
yes.
and we've been here a year, and there can be some people that don't even know that is going on. So just the courtesy of here's what's happening ward by ward for councillors, considering we have to approve all of these things. And secondly, it actually has to do with the, just a quick review of everything that's out there. And I will have a look at that, but I'm not sure that it meets the requirements that I'm asking for.
Well, we're happy to go offline and speak with you more about what you would like.
Let's figure that out before council and then have to make a motion there. Don't want to have to.
Okay. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the report. With respect to prioritization of work, because it simply lists the category of project title and complete or not complete, is there, can you provide us with more information as a supplementary report going to council, just a bit more detail on, is it in progress, are you 20% complete, are you on track to complete? It just would be very helpful.
Through the speaker, we've indicated in the appendix what the 2020 forecast is. This is a living document, and I think with respect, what you're asking is it would be a considerable amount of work to further parse the status of all of those items. I believe there are 142 items listed in that. The prioritization of the work is around the growth pressure, obviously, the alignment with housing, the alignment with transit, the alignment with neighborhoods in transition. Those are some of the factors that we have drawn upon in order to assess whether or not something needs to take a back seat or a front seat. I think also the development pressure in some of these areas. We put a lot of emphasis, for example, on Yonge and Eglinton downtown in the last couple of years because of that development pressure, and we continue to do that through the work that we've done in King Parliament and King Spadina. So that's a overall answer to your question, but I think it would be to get another layer down of more exact status is something that I think we'll have to monitor as the year. We've tried to produce this on an annual basis, knowing that we do have many in-year pressures and in-year changes that move things around.
And I can certainly appreciate the resource capacity has limitations, but I guess my question is, even if that information was not made public, you as chief planner and those in your office would have a clearly, I would imagine, itemized, detailed work plan. A staff lead that's been assigned, even if you were to put this on a live Google Doc, share with your staff and ask them some very basic questions. How would you track workplace performance if you think if what I'm asking you is so difficult? I would imagine that as a manager, you just have this at your fingertips.
Well, I don't know that I have it as you've just described it. I'll be completely transparent about that, but I believe that the various leads who are responsible for all these projects do have a good read on the status, and I don't have it as a fingertip, I think, the way you've described it, and it would involve more work than because I don't have that type of system.
So I guess how would you be able to adhere to the request of meeting deadlines if you don't have a clear indication? And I'm just trying to understand. It's very easy for things to fall off someone's desk, and if someone is managing 50 files, and if they don't have a sense of how to prioritize the work, and you don't have a sense, or your manager is managing those individuals, who's in charge?
Wow.
And how do we ensure that accountability?
So I think the example I would use is thinking about a section of staff across the city. We deliver services in districts by sections. I think we have 14 community planning managers, and each of those community planning managers have a very good handle on what's going on in those geographies and the priorities and pressures that they're managing with those applications. We also have this annual report on the work program, and we assess this on an annual basis. We update it throughout the year with quarterly updates that we ask all of our project leads to provide. So it is something, while we may report annually on the status, we monitor this as a management team throughout the year. And I would submit we have a very good read on our pressures. It's not as perfect as fingertip information, but we have a very good read on the pressures that we're trying to manage, understanding that we have many in-year changes, new requests from council, things that move around that we have to constantly accommodate.
Just final question, and this
Excuse
will
me,
be my last question.
through the chair, could I just add to that? I think, Councillor, a good example of how we respond to the question that you're asking is on Mr. Christie's report, the Christie's report that's on committee today. So in the recommendations, we talk about targeting the final report for the fourth quarter, and that is our clear intent. But I will be completely transparent. If council was to direct us to do certain other matters as a key priority, or if there was new legislative pressures put on us, we may slide from that fourth quarter and we would end up in the first quarter. And that's why, you know, most of our work that we advance, we use the quarters. So to manage expectations that it's not going to be there September because there's unknowns. So we target a quarter. And I think on everything that we bring forward, we have an excellent handle on that. But it's really reflected in the reports that come to committee for the most part.
I can just ask my final question. I apologize. So I'll leave your comment exactly as that. I won't comment any further. The chain store retail strategy, remember that? There was a motion that was asking on how to perhaps borrow from San Francisco's formula store retail strategy, and I don't see this in your work plan. This is something that council specifically asked for. And the citywide heritage study, maybe it was in here, but I couldn't find it. So something as simple as the chain store retail strategy, it came out of a motion. There was about 9 months allocated to do the work, and it doesn't even appear on this document. It's just the one that pops to mind. Where did that go?
Okay, so the chain store, I do recall that one, and it's always, I'll just say it's always rats, you found one, you know. We have produced a retail, and published it online, actually, a retail guideline. Design guideline. It's part of. It's supportive of an initial piece of work. We are also working with economic development on their citywide, because they too got instructed on retail vibrancy of main streets. I will undertake to get an update for you on the exact status of that, because I do recall that motion, but I'm just thinking in my mind that we conjoined it with some other initiatives, and I'd like to be able to be more precise with you.
I don't think the retail zoning update even touched close to the heart of the
I don't mean the retail zoning update. I mean another document that we've published. But I will provide you with an update on that.
I'll look forward to that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just a couple of questions. So for our inclusionary zoning policy framework, I know we're waiting for the regulations, but part of this work, because of this new legislation, we need our master transportation areas, MTSAs, master transport, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Major transit, exactly. We need that work to be completed, correct? That's how we actually will bring it into force.
That's one of the approaches, yes.
Okay, so where is that work here? Because I don't want us to then have, you know, part of the work done and then not have the other work done. So how is that work?
Page 25, under demographics, economic, speaks to growth plan conformity.
However, it would be preferable if we added another item, because we are bringing the report forward to the March meeting that will outline our approach to the municipal comprehensive review and the prioritization of the MTSA work.
Which is going to enable us to then implement the inclusionary zoning. So, and that requires official plan.
Yes, so there would be a preference to add an item under official plan.
Explaining that.
Yes.
To make sure that it's.
Yes.
Okay. And the zoning bylaw 2.0 missing middle, this is all the work that is, it's the project that is around the missing middle.
That's correct. We are anticipating a spring report. We're doing a lot of research on that to provide a good fact base for council and an outline of missing middle approaches that would then become a series of more discrete projects.
So eventually we might have more line items coming from this, but right now that's the work that you're referring to.
Absolutely, and why I made the comment earlier that this is very much a living document.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. That's it for me. Any speakers? Any councilors to speak? Seeing none. Motion to approve. Oh.
Leave the motion.
Oh, I move to ask. So this is to respond to the question that I asked, to make sure that we move on the major transit station areas and employment review, which needs to be completed in order to implement our inclusionary zoning. So we want these things to move as fast as possible and together. Okay. All those in favor? That carries. Item as amended. All those in favor? That carries. And that adjourns our meeting. Thank you to the members of the committee and thank you to staff.